I'm Ari Redbord, and this is TRM Talks. I am Global Head of Policy at TRM Labs. At TRM, we provide blockchain intelligence software to support law enforcement investigations and to help financial institutions and cryptocurrency businesses mitigate financial crime risk within the emerging digital asset economy. Prior to joining TRM, I spent 15 years in the U.S. federal government, first as a prosecutor at the Department of Justice, and then as a Treasury Department official, where I worked to safeguard the financial system against terrorist financiers, weapons of mass destruction proliferators, drug kingpins, and other rogue actors. On TRM Talks, I sit down with business leaders, policymakers, investigators, and friends from across the crypto ecosystem who are working to build a safer financial system. Today we have a very special guest, Senior Public Prosecutor with the Prosecutor's General Office in Frankfurt, Jana Ringwald. But first, inside the lab, where I share data-driven insights from our blockchain intelligence team. As I was working on Inside the Lab this week, I surveyed our insights page on trmlabs.com, which is filled with examples of law enforcement using TRM to track and trace the flow of funds, to catch bad actors, and ultimately seize back ill-gotten funds. How does this work? First, it is important to point out that TRM is one tool in a toolbox of an agent or investigator. They use TRM to trace the flow of funds on open blockchains, which are transparent, traceable, and immutable, and often follow those funds to an exchange. The agents can then send a subpoena to an exchange to learn more information. A compliant exchange, think Coinbase, Crypto.com, Binance, and others, have compliance teams, professionals who respond to law enforcement subpoenas. Crypto investigations can be relatively simple. A bad actor steals funds and sends to an exchange to off-ramp them. Or they could be much more complex. In the Bitfinex case, for example, investigators from IRSCI, we've heard from Christian Chesky, who now leads TRM's global investigations team on the show. He was the lead case agent in the Bitfinex case, traced hacked funds across years and every obfuscation technique in the book to ultimately seize back funds and make arrests. The hackers and the money launderers in the Bitfinex case sent them through darknet markets, mixers, used anonymity-enhanced coins, privacy coins. They move funds in rapid succession across blockchains, chain hopping, and other obfuscation techniques in order to cover their tracks. However, Chris and other agents from IRSCI were able to track and trace those funds through those obfuscation techniques. As our former colleague Zia Faruqi famously said, every crime is a financial crime. TRM simply allows investigators to follow the money when crypto is involved. In the traditional world, we have to follow the money through networks of shell companies and hawalas, wire transfers, high-value art, real estate, and other opaque means. Crypto, which lives and moves on an open ledger, allows us to follow the money in new and innovative ways using tools like TRM. It is our greatest honor to work with investigators across the globe to support their work tracing and tracking the flow of funds in crypto. For much more on crypto investigations and an updated weekly library of examples, check out our TRM Insights page at trmlabs.com. All right, now let's sit down with Jana Ringwald. Jana, I have wanted to have this conversation with you for so long. Really, really excited to have you on TRM Talks today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really proud and I'm so excited to do that with you.
Fantastic. But before we sort of dig into the work, would love to hear about your personal journey. How did you become this sort of expert globally on cybercrime and investigating these types of cases?
Yeah, well, let's start with where I am now. I think I have the most exciting, the most dynamic, and also the most digital job you can have in judiciary in Germany. Right now, I am the team lead of cybercrime investigations in the narrower sense. And my team and I, we have the privilege to run high-stakes cybercrime cases together with the German Federal Criminal Police Office for pros, better known as the BKA. The moment I stepped into that office, and that was in 2017, they said to me literally, Jana, somebody needs to do something about those cryptos, And I think they said somebody needs to do something about those Bitcoins, because
Sure, absolutely.
they thought that was the only thing that was existing. So my journey started somewhere completely different. I was raised in a very protected childhood in the southern parts of Germany. And what people wouldn't know and wouldn't believe, is that I used to be a very shy little girl, happy to have a bigger brother, 5 years older, who protected me all the time. Dad was a Navy officer and a handball pro. Mom worked with the government. So my childhood was about love, sports, and discipline, And no one would have thought at that point, at 42 now, I would be what I am now, in this world. So it was crazy to come to this point. Yeah.
What is it that caused you to sort of want to become a prosecutor?
The question is, why did I even study law? And I was raised in a church girls' school, and the decision between engineering and law was very narrow. But the thing was, at the time that when I was 17 and 18, I thought my future would be lying in diplomacy. So that was why I picked law. And then I did an internship, in the German embassy in Rome. And then I found out, okay, it's interesting, but it's not aggressive enough for me. So I wanted to do something a little more thrilling. And you can't pick becoming a prosecutor, but they also need to pick you. It's something you cannot really count on, And when I was 27 and started that, I was, positively surprised. They said, we want to have you. And I started then in white-collar crime. I'd never thought of crypto crime at that time or cybercrime. And what I loved about prosecution, because I picked a branch which is not picked that much by young prosecutors. They want to do what they see on TV. They want to see the personal drama and, all that.
I totally wanted to do what I saw on TV.
And I never did that. I was always the nerd. I was always a little different. And what I loved about prosecution of white-collar crime was, the sophisticated cases, the defendant lawyers that are intelligent as you are, the analytical way to work, and the clean thing about it. And I think white-collar crime and crypto crime and cybercrime have a lot in common. It's about money, it's about data. And you can also be impressed by what these guys do, in a way, in a scientific way. So
Sure.
I wanted to work analytically. And that is, I think, the maths and physics part of my personality, which I didn't put into my profession, but that then came out in numbers and balance sheets in the beginning of my prosecutorial career.
I love it. I think it's so important to have those folks. It's funny. Like, I have very much the opposite story. Like, I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I clerked for a federal judge in North Carolina, and I watched the assistant U.S. attorneys walk around the well of the courtroom, holding the gun as evidence in their hand, and the theatrics around it. Like, that is like, I was like, that is what I want to do. And I like the way you described. I think people think like, oh, I want to be a prosecutor, so you become one. Mm-hmm. I tried to be an assistant U.S. attorney for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, and finally got the job years after I applied for it. So like, it was definitely one of the most exciting moments of my life. But I think it's so important. And there are different kinds of cases, right? There are the violent crime cases that I spent the beginnings of my career on, but then there are the ones that you're really, really digging in to mountains of paper. I think people don't realize the analytics that kind of goes into it. When you gravitated to sort of more of these crypto cyber investigations, was it very much like, hey, these are the new white collar cases? People are just kind of moving funds differently?
I didn't realize that in the first place. Actually, the way I came into cyber was funny because I loved white collar crime so much that I thought this is my future, And then people told me, you're way too young to do that for the rest of your career. You need to do something different. And against my will, I was kicked out of that branch, and I needed to be educated then in MLA, in mutual legal assistance, which now I benefit very much from. But at the time, it was the most boring thing to do. And I needed to do politically motivated crime. So I was then sitting in my office, and somehow I ended up in an in-house teaching. And one of the guys of the BKA came, and one of the colleagues I work with now came to tell drugs prosecutors, and I was not one of them, what the dark web was and what Bitcoin was. And I cannot recall how I ended up in this schooling. I wasn't even prepared. I didn't have a pen. I didn't have a piece of paper. And then a colleague gave me this. And I still keep that piece of paper because that moment I was born a cybercrime prosecutor, because I kind of understood that this is the most exciting thing you could do as a prosecutor, not having a clue. And I got on their nerves so much, believing that I wouldn't have a chance because I was no prosecutor in drugs, And then they called me in the night and said, we just believe you're driven enough and you're crazy enough to do this, and we'll get you on board, and, you will have everything you need. But would you like to work with us? And that is the way I came into this. Now I'm in the position to say there is no analog crime happening anymore. If you steal a bicycle, you will have your mobile with you and GPS will follow you. Like there is no non-data driven crime anymore, And same goes with financial crime. I was forced into the position because, as I said, literally somebody needed to do something about those cryptos because some crazy agent in 2014 for the first time had seized them and nobody knew why. Like, is this important? Is this something that goes away? And it didn't go away. And then over the time, just because I did my job and I needed to, I understood that this is much bigger than we thought. And of course, having stepped into this 7 years ago is great because even at the time, the market, not law enforcement judiciary, but the financial market even didn't know what was coming up, because I think the crypto ecosystem is much bigger than crypto crime. Of course it is. So over the years, I understood while working on it very actively how big it actually is. And I still learn it. I'm still educated in this.
I love that story because it's sort of law enforcement driving you into this space, right? The BKA did this presentation on Bitcoin, on cybercrime. And I think what people don't necessarily always realize that like German authorities, BKA in particular, has really led in the sort of takedown of the largest darknet markets, right? Hydra and others. And this has been sort of a huge focus. But if you're a law enforcement, my experience was you're always trying to get the best prosecutors who could really help you drive cases into court and through court. Like to me, the greatest compliment you could ever have is for law enforcement to reach out directly and say, hey, we'd like you to work these cases with us, right? That's your story. I love that.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. I feel the privilege that these guys who enable me to do my job, because who would I be without them, that they love to work with me. I couldn't agree more. It is such a privilege to have them around me and have them call me in the morning saying, okay, Anna, it sounds crazy, but listen to it first and then we're going to explain, I am important, of course. I'm taking the legal responsibility for all of this, but I would be nobody without them. The question you raised is, what is a good cybercrime prosecutor? Somebody who has done their homework and who is a technical person. I think a very good cybercrime prosecutor is very flexible in their mind. They listen well. Law folks do all the time. They judge. They hear something and again, they judge, this is wrong, this is right, we shouldn't do this, we should do this. And I need to stretch my mind. I need to be very elastic in order to understand what we need to tackle and how we can then, respond to this. Because the legislator has never thought about that. This is our default position. The launch pad is that the legislator has never thought of what we need to do now. And that's great.
I love that. I wanted to get into that piece in a second, but when I think about the truly great prosecutors that I have worked with in my career, there's a guy named Zia Faruqi, who's now a federal judge in DC, and Jessica Peck at the Department of Justice, and Alden Pelker, and a whole bunch of other ones. We always see ourselves as conduits for the work that the great agents and investigators have done, right? Like we're just translators.
Yeah.
We take what they provide us, the evidence, and translate it for a jury who are lay people or to a judge who might not be in the German system, who might not be a technical expert, right? And I love that they look to you kind of to do that. Let's talk about the work a little bit. What are examples of sort of those cases that you were able to work? And maybe to the extent that you're willing, sort of like talk through the life cycle. How did those big cases come to you? And then what did you sort of do with the evidence?
Well, my favorite case of all times, I think, will be Wall Street Market because it was the perfect piece of thing I could do. We took it down in 2019. It was active for 2 years. It used to be the second biggest marketplace. And then in the last days, when Dream Market scammed, it was the most important dark web marketplace, especially for drugs, but other goods as well. And why was it so extraordinary? It was extraordinary because we found all the administrators. They were all Germans. They were all arrested. We found the entire infrastructure. We understood the marketplace before we had them. We seized all the Bitcoins. We brought them to trial. There was nothing we left out, and we just brought it home, and we learned so much. We brought data into court, which had never been done that way before in Germany. It's still new for normal judges, just as you've said. The judge who needed to do Wall Street Market the day before he had a robbery to do, they're really, and you need to bring that to them. And I think it is a duty, to make it doable in court. That was Wall Street market, and I still benefit from it, and all of us do. You named Hydra Market. That was a couple of years later, and that was in 2022 when we took down Hydra Market, and also ChipMixer 1 year after that. That was another marketplace, and ChipMixer was the most important dark web crypto mixing service. So different things, but same approach, because we did not have the administrators. I mean, when we investigated Hansa Market, also German administrators, by the way, and Wall Street Market, we had the full case, the subjects, the perpetrators. And we knew right from the beginning when we tackled Hydra Market and ChipMixer, it would not centrally be, of course also, but not centrally be about the persons, but about the infrastructure, about the money. And this is something which has shifted extremely, knowing that many of those people will not be traveling or will be in countries that do not cooperate as others do, that we need to adjust our work. We cannot work like we did 100 years ago, that the only access would be happening in the courtroom with the people sitting on the bench and the jury, in your case, deciding on them. But that we need to be more dynamic because it's happening so fast, and the resilience in the underground economy is insane, So we shifted to tackling infrastructure and crypto financial transfers and transactions and to take the money away from them. The interesting question is, how do these cases come to us? And you cannot give one response because, of course, it's not Mrs. Smith living in Berlin and saying there is a marketplace, you need to do something about it. That never is the beginning. Of course, we monitor what is happening. And then people ask us, of so much crime in the underground economy. How do you tackle all of that? And of course, we tackle what we can tackle where it makes sense, where we have German jurisdiction. But we always have many candidates. We have many phenomena we want to tackle and we need to tackle, but there is a time for everything. And you need to have a good launchpad. And that can be a good hint from your colleagues from the FBI. That can be a server being hosted in Germany. That can be whatever it can be. And only if we see a way, a technical way and a legal way to do the whole thing, which is never guaranteed, of course, then we go for it.
You said a couple of really extraordinary things. I think one in large part is it's got to be a mind shift from like, what is a successful outcome, right? It's always been a successful outcome of putting handcuffs on people, ultimately putting someone in jail. But the reality is when you're talking about cross-border transnational crime, it's often that cyber actors are in North Korea, they're in Russia, they're in China, places that are impossible to ultimately extradite from, or places that there is no mutual legal assistance, as you mentioned. So I would love to kind of just dig into that mindset a little bit and how you've seen that shift, if you've seen a shift.
What I see is that what is happening in the underground economy is so dynamic and so different from what had been happening that we need to react to that. And the question is, how do we get the folks to work differently? We want to talk about cryptos too, right? So the question is, how do I get people on crypto investigations? How do I convince them that this is important and that the normal prosecutor, not being a cybercrime prosecutor, not a dark web prosecutor, needs to know about that? The incentive of the whole thing is that we do face some advantages in the crypto world. In the fiat world, it was just some clicks and money was transferred to different countries. And as a perpetrator, you would then cross countries by clicking. And we as prosecutors would be then writing 3 requests to 3 countries that do not cooperate to run after that money. And that can be different. It's not always different, but it can be different in the crypto world. So if you found, and there are many of them, a cooperative exchange service somewhere abroad, even offshore, but they do cooperate, then you really have the chance to come to the money. And the thing is, having the perpetrators is something the public expects us to do, to succeed in. But what they also want us to do is to protect the society. And if grandma has lost 2,000 euros in crypto somewhere and we bring them back, this is the message we want to bring across. And when bringing crypto into the prosecutors' minds, I actually do that by babysitting them through the process. So I became somehow the go-to person in the state I work in, and also in Germany. They just call me and say, what can I do now? I'm at this point, and what can I do now? And I see that they want to bring money back to people. And that's, I think, the best advertisement we can do, because that's really useful. And by not having the perpetrators, we do have legal instruments to seize and confiscate assets abroad, if we have a cooperative exchange, and bring it back to the people. And if a younger or even older prosecutor has done that for the first time, and then they hear the money may that be in fiat or in crypto, is on the wallet and bring it back to the people. Those people are on fire. I mean, I love the moment in which colleagues call me and saying, I do believe it. I want it again. I want to do it again, Jana. This is great.
Talk about how you're using blockchain technology, blockchain analytics, blockchain intelligence to build these investigations. How are you using tools like TRM?
Well, first of all, you need education and the awareness and the understanding what we actually talk about, that this is something different from the financial system we normally are raised in. And mostly I see the enthusiasm of people once they have understood that, because not being a prosecutor is already interesting. And the state I work in, also the police, not only the BKA, but also the state police, has implemented a framework which has the understanding that all police officers should be able, not asking the bigger brother, but should be able to trace crypto as a default position in financial investigations. And that's the thing, actually. That's not happening in all of Germany, but this is something we say, this is the new normal. You need to know that, just as you know how to ask banks for bank records, you need to know how to trace. And what we do is very simple. We decided against a pooling situation, that a police agent needs to ask another police agent to do the job for them, because we think that crypto investigations are so pivotal, you cannot outsource this. You need to implement that in your case, in your thinking, in your strategies and everything. And that requires for your agents to be able to do it themselves. And that means that police agents should have access to tools, and not only to one tool, because, it's a technology, as you've said. It's rocket science, and the technologies are different. You can go cluster-based, you can go address-based, and what we try to investigate can be questioned at court. A judge, and that's of course a challenge, could say, okay, but this tool says something. But apparently it says, if this address is part of that cluster, it belongs to that. How do they know that? Why is this the result? And so we also taught them that we need to have firm evidence, in terms of as good as it can get, and that requires for education, that requires for tooling, and for everybody. We're not there yet, but I think to say this is a specialization and that's something crazy and some expert do that is not the right way. And what we said is everybody needs to know that. And we start with it, even if we don't start perfectly. And therefore, to bring people to the understanding that financial investigations that are as old as law enforcement itself, follow the trace of the money. That's what we've done 100 years. That needs to just be done in a different way now, and this is how we do that.
Right before jumping on this conversation, I actually was reading a release from Europol that was from the end of February, where German authorities led, I think it was Munich-based, a case involving massive VAT fraud, tax fraud, essentially throughout Europe. I want to say it was probably the biggest cross-border case I've ever seen. It was like 117 people arrested, 680, investigators and tax experts involved. Just massive cross-border collaboration. Crypto was one piece of a much broader case that involves cell phones and cash and gold and cars and houses, real estate, right? I feel like what you're articulating is just that we might not necessarily see the hydras and the Wall Street markets and these huge cases every day that are very crypto focused, but crypto is going to be a part of every case that we're seeing. And every investigator kind of needs to have some of that expertise. They might not be Jana Ringwald, but they are going to need some level of tracing. Prosecutors are going to need some level of tracing capabilities and understanding of the tech. Are we starting to see that already, where crypto is involved in more and more cases, even if it's not what I'd call like a crypto-focused investigation?
Absolutely, because it's so easy, it's so accessible. You can see that the market understands that people want to invest in cryptos. It's completely legal to do that. I couldn't agree more, because it's not about the high-stakes cybercrime cases, but the drugs vendor, he might not even have bought them or sold them over cryptos, but he might have a wallet. The thing is, you would always seize his car. You would always seize his gold. You would always take away the cash. So, of course, you need to investigate on his computer if he has a wallet, because it's what people do now, and the market capitalization is, I think, big enough to take it seriously. And by the way, and this is something where I also provoke people a little, German law forces prosecutors to take away everything they have until they reach the amount we need to take away from them. At least since 2017, when the federal court in Germany decided that, at the time it was just Bitcoin, but he meant cryptos, of course, that they were valuable and you could always reach a actual market price and that you can buy stuff with them in a way, you need to seize them. Since 2017, there's actually no chance, like legally speaking, to refrain from that.
Absolutely. Look, I think that asset seizure, asset forfeiture becomes more and more important in cases where you might not be making arrests or might not getting extradition. Just take the money. That is a very, very powerful tool. And I think we're seeing that globally in more and more cases. Just to kind of close out on this, what are the key threats that you're seeing right now as you're investigating cases?
The key threat I still see is not lying in the cases, but it is lying in the risk that law enforcement and judiciary do not respond fast enough. It is frustrating to see how easy it is for perpetrators to simply get away with their cryptos because it's so much easier to get the cryptos than it has ever been to get their fiat money. Knowing that police and judiciary do not do enough, they don't hide that much what they do. You find them on Coinbase, you find them on Kraken, you find them on Binance all the time. And it's sometimes unbearable for me to see that the basic steps, which would bring us the money back, are not being taken. So the basic threat I see is that we do not understand that the guys are already there. It happens without us or it happens with us, because when people are being defrauded, I think the problems are pretty much the same as they used to be 30 years ago, that people are not informed, they are overwhelmed, that they believe this is a good investment and stuff like that. And I think the medium has changed. That's not the crucial thing. But the biggest threat is that we do not take it seriously enough and it goes so fast.
The promise of this technology is cross-border value transfer at the speed of the internet, right? We can now move larger amounts of funds faster than ever before. That is why this technology is so extraordinary. This is why I think that a lot of our financial system will move at least to blockchain-based rails. The challenge, though, is we can now move money faster in larger amounts than ever before, right? So how do we think about this? Is it just getting more agents and investigators up to speed and access to tools? Is it ensuring better compliance on off-ramps? I'm going to meet with the Financial Action Task Force in a few weeks in Paris. They're going to be talking about implementation of their standards globally to stop exactly what you're describing, right? Like off-ramping funds. How should we be thinking about this?
Well, one thing, of course, needs to be that police and judiciary are being well educated. I think this goes without saying. On the other hand, every disadvantage brings an advantage. As you said, we can transfer much quicker than we used to. But we sometimes have better access than we used to because there are countries whose banks were never reachable for us. But on the blockchain, you can just trace. Of course, if they mix it, it's not always possible, but you might end up at a corner they have forgotten about. So it brings a disadvantage. It goes much faster, but it also brings advantages. Next to that, what we see, of course, and you know that better than I do, is that we see a very vital and dynamic market, players, exchanges and you can see what they focus on, if they are camp collaboration or if they are camp non-collaboration with us, So, and we need to get away from this arrogance that if law enforcement says something, it's being done. Because you can say, we are law enforcement, you need to do that. And if they do not respond, you have the same problem as you did in the first place. So what we as law enforcement need to do is to step together to tackle certain providers and exchanges that do not collaborate that much when it comes to KYC and all that stuff. Of course, you need to make it harder for people to do that anonymously. That will always be possible, but also that is possible with cash. The areas just shift. And I think our task is to not stand in the way, but to go with it, and I need to motivate prosecutors. For example, we are used to the situation that we seize assets at the Deutsche Bank, and the Deutsche Bank, of course, has a department that then secures those assets for 3 or 5 years, And now the providers tell us, well, we are, first of all, offshore, not that interested, and you got a week, And then we throw these assets away. And then prosecutors are afraid to take them and sovereignty and whatever, And we need to, very dynamically respond to the market. and to not give them that much space to do what they want.
Really smart. A lot of it does come down to like implementation of standards when it comes to compliance globally. And like you named sort of, the Coinbases and the Binances and the Krakens, like they have compliance controls, they have compliance teams today, but there are so many sort of gaps. This is interesting because this is a great jumping off point to something I wanted to ask you about. Look, when I was a prosecutor, something I loved about the job was that like I was just tunnel vision, right? I was laser focused on, I had a bad actor in front of me. I had a very specific case. My only job was to prosecute that case. In fact, if you ever said anything like send a message in front of a jury, it was an automatic mistrial, right? I got to Treasury and now at TRM, I think a lot more about the policy behind a lot of sort of this. I do feel like kind of seeing you out in the world, you are focused on both to a large extent. As a quick aside, Frankfurt was just selected as the home for the new anti-money laundering authority for the entire European Union. You're probably going to be dealing with more of this, not less of this. Talk to me about sort of how does policy implicate prosecution?
To the moment being, I do not feel that my work is being influenced that much by policy because the threats we tackle are pretty much dictated by the perpetrators, It's more that I see my duty to influence policy, to talk publicly, and I have the privilege that people listen to me. And the funny thing about law enforcement and judiciary is we are actually a little branch in public activities, Courtrooms normally are not about crime, but about neighbors and stuff like that. But the thing is that I do not directly influence politics or policies, and they do not directly influence us. But the thing is that talking about prosecution has always been interesting. People have always loved those stories. They read crime when they lie at the pool, And the thing is, the crypto ecosystem is much bigger than crypto crime. The internet is much bigger than the underground economy. Big data is much bigger than data-driven investigations. But the part we do and you have done is interesting. And I'm overwhelmed that I can actually call everybody and people listen to me because somehow with our stories, they see the need to tackle that. It's a combination of being thrilled and seeing the problem at the same time, I must say my work is not dramatically being influenced by policies because what I'm influenced by is the front we stand at and the cases we need to tackle and the people we need to train all the time. That's what influences my work on a day-to-day basis. What I want to do to influence the process is to bring this to more attention,
Policymakers do want to understand the investigations, the prosecutions, but understanding that like the policy doesn't necessarily drive your work, but examples of how you use blockchain technology, how you do these types of investigations can ultimately influence the way policymakers think about these things. There's so much going on and it's so exciting. So what do you read by the pool? Since people are reading real crime. No, but to that point, like what does Jana do when you're not sort of taking down the world's largest darknet markets and, doing these crypto investigations at the highest level, working with law enforcement? What do you do? How do you keep sane in this world that we live in with all this illicit activity?
Well, to directly answer your question, what I read at the pool is Alan Watts. You can never have enough of Alan Watts. No, I love it. I love to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I love to roll out my yoga mat wherever I am, preferably outside. I love to get on the nerves of my kids with my good morning mood. I love to travel in a way that makes my kids ask, Mom, are we even allowed to walk here? I think we're not. So,
where have some of those places been?
On the very northern part of Ibiza. So we walked through that forest and my kids were really insisting and saying, Mom, we're not allowed to walk. You are a prosecutor. You should be walking on. No, being a prosecutor is great. But sometimes you need some freedom and, I find peace in nature. I find peace in the very early morning. I find it on my mat. I find it with my kids and friends. This is who I am as a person. Yeah.
It's amazing. Probably why we've connected the way we have over the years. Certainly family keeps you pretty grounded. And for me, it's running to kind of clear my head and think straight. It's amazing and just so proud of the work that you do and just the leader that you are in this space. So just really thank you so much for joining TRM Talks and excited to continue this conversation.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. It was great fun to talk with you.
Amazing. I always love talking to Jana, and what was cool about this conversation is it was actually very similar to a lot of the conversations we have privately It's really this sort of understanding as a prosecutor about how you really have to change your mindset when it comes to cryptocurrency investigations, right? This whole nature of cross-border, transnational crime means that we have to think less about maybe making arrests from local police or from national police forces, and really more, how do we disrupt networks of cyber criminals, state actors? She had this great way of articulating the way you have to flip your mindset from being a white-collar investigator or a violent crime investigator to this sort of new world where now you can move funds faster across borders than ever before, but you can also investigate them in order to seize back funds. Next on TRM Talks, I sit down with Sarah Hammer, Executive Director at the Wharton School and an adjunct professor at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. We'll discuss the future of finance, the use of AI, cyber, and the role that academia plays in building a safer financial system. If you love the show, leave a review wherever you're listening to it. For more crypto insights, you can also subscribe to the TRM Weekly Roundup at trmlabs.com.
TRM Talks is brought to you by TRM Labs, the leading provider of blockchain intelligence and anti-money laundering software. This episode was produced in partnership with Voltage Productions. The music for this show was provided by Ecolix.
Now, let's get back to building.